All right, here we go with our third part of chapter 16 video lecture. So we're looking at the Americas, we're looking at the conquest of the New World, we're looking at the setup of a new type of culture that is going to blend indigenous native culture with Spanish and European culture and African culture, all mixed into this nice, weird, multicultural thing we call Latin America. So if you look at the map, you notice that the vast majority of Latin America is Catholic, and this is of course a result of this Columbian exchange and the conquest of the New World. Now in colonial society, like I just mentioned, we have a mix of American, Indian, and African society mixing and matching, blending in and blending out. Now, of course, Catholicism spreads to the Americas thanks to the work of the Jesuits. Remember, the Jesuits was the monastic order of monks who were organized during the Catholic Reformation, right after the Protestant Reformation. And these super religious monks came to the Americas, traveled with the conquistadors and all the other explorers, and they were responsible for converting the natives. Right, and they're going to do an extremely good job because either they're going to use force or they're going to use education as the tools for conversion. Now, just because the natives have been conquered, we're looking, the indigenous people of the Americas, just because they've been conquered doesn't mean that they're going to be so quick to give up the traditions that they have. And even though, praying to the old Aztec or Inca gods or the old Native American gods and spirits, that type of religious activity would have been prohibited, would have been banned, and probably would have resulted in some type of execution or torture with the Inquisition. It doesn't mean that they completely gave it up. So what many of the people start doing is that they adopt Catholicism, the Catholic religion, but they're going to still keep a little tiny trace of their traditions, right? And kind of the most famous example is in Mexico with the observance of the Virgin of Guadalupe. So the Virgin of Guadalupe is considered to be this kind of like appearance of the Virgin Mary in a city called Guadalupe, and whenever she is portrayed, she tends to take on a darker skin tone. So she is not as white as the Europeans are, but she is more dark skinned, similar to what the native Mexicans would have been. So even though, again, they're praying to the this saint in the Catholic religion, they are observing her, or they are portraying her as one of their own. And instead of praying to God, a lot of these are going to start praying to the Virgin Mary directly. So we see that the Virgin Mary takes on this critical importance in Mexican Catholicism. And the Mexican Catholics are also going to continue with the practice or the observation of the Day of the Dead, right, which occurs right about Halloween, in our calendar. And this is when they go to cemeteries and graveyards, and they are going to throw these parties to celebrate their ancestors. So it's kind of like a modern twist on ancestor veneration. And again, this practice is not part of the traditional Catholic faith that the Europeans would have brought over, right? But this praying to your dead ancestors, that's more of an Aztec thing. That's more of an indigenous Native American thing. So they're going to combine the Catholic faith that they're being imposed on, but they're going to keep and maintain a little trace of their traditions. Now, the same thing is going to happen with Africans. Right? Remember, the African people, the sub-Saharan African people, they were animists. They believed in many gods and in spirits and in nature spirits and stuff like that. So when they are brought over to the Americas through the slave trade, they're told from now on, you are a Catholic Christian. Right? So they're forced to convert. But they're going to keep some of those old African traditions. and they're just gonna do a twist. So for example, instead of praying to their old nature spirits or their old gods, right, now they're gonna start praying to the Catholic saints, right, and they're gonna start giving the saints the same characteristics, the same importance as they would have done to their traditional gods back home in sub-Saharan Africa. So by maintaining roots, traces of their roots of traditional African beliefs, these Africans being transported, these slaves population, they're going to synchronize these two traditions, Catholic tradition with African tradition, and the end result is the creation of two kind of new synchronized or syncretic religious practices, which is Santeria, right, most common of course in Cuba, and Vodun, also known as voodoo, that we see in Haiti, right? And of course it makes sense that the Caribbean is going to be the birthplace of these syncretic religions, because millions and millions of Africans who were enslaved were sent to work in the Caribbean for these sugar and tobacco plantations. So for example, here we see a vase of Santeria, right? But there's pictures of saints and the Virgin Mary and stuff like that. And again, it is a blending of Catholic European religion and African traditional religion. Now, Latin American society is going to be equally blended and mixed and matched and diverse as well. And what we're going to see is that we're going to form a new society, right, known as the mestizos, right? That's going to be the dominant group in Latin America. And the mestizos are people who are mixed race. They are part Native American and part sorry, they're not going to be the most dominant race. What am I talking about? All right, but there's going to be a big part. The mestizos are part Native American and part European. So how did this happen? Well, the vast majority of the people of Spain who came over to live in and colonize and conquer the Americas, the vast majority of those were men, right? So it was a male-centered migration from Spain to Latin America. So these men, they're out there conquering and winning and conquering and taking over land and stuff, but they want to settle down, they want to have kids, they want to have a family, so they hook up with native women. Right, they're going to settle down and marry native women. So their offspring are going to be mestizos, right? Half European, half Indian. The same thing is going to happen with the Portuguese, right, in Brazil. But not only are they going to be mixing with the native population, they're also going to have relations with Africans. Right, so they're going to bring African slave women and settle with them and have what they call mulattoes, right? Mixed African and European ancestry. So what we see is that this population of mixed races becomes a big part of Latin American society, right? So here we see the social hierarchy. Those mixed race people, they would be middle class. If you were native or if you were African, 100% native or 100% African, you will be at the lowest class, right? And of course, this is by these two groups down here, the middle and the lowest class, that's the biggest chunk of the population. But they're not the ones in charge, right? The ones in charge are the Europeans. And the main group is the Peninsulares. That means people from the peninsula, from the Iberian Peninsula, which is Spain and Portugal. So if you were born in Spain or Portugal, you were at the top of this social ladder, of this social structure. If you were born to parents who are both Europeans, but you were born in the Americas, like in the colonies, right, but you are 100% European, you were known as Creole. So this is the social organization: Peninsulares, Creoles, the mixed race, mestizos and mulattoes, and then the native and the Africans all the way at the bottom. Of course, these would be the slaves and the peasants. So So this social structure, of course, is entirely based on race, on skin color and ancestry. So it doesn't matter what job you have, right? If you are white, if you're a white European, chances are you're going to be considered upper class. And if you were mixed race, then you would be considered middle. And if you were not, if you're African or native, then you'll be at the bottom. Now, within these groups, there's even further division depending on your ancestry. So imagine you are 3/4 European and 1/4 native, then you will be a mulatto, but you will be a little bit higher up than those people who are like 50-50, right? And if you were 1/4 European and 3/4 native, then you will be a mulatto or a mestizo, but you will be more of a lower class mestizo. So the skin tone and your ancestry played a major role as the determining factor of your social status, right? The more European you were, the more white you were, the higher up you were in the society. Now, of course, this is a patriarchal society, so women in the colonies had very limited rights. Now, like we've seen in other places, lower class women tended to have more freedom because they had more responsibilities and roles, or they had to go do jobs. So lower class women were allowed to freely go into the streets and to the marketplace and do work. But upper class women, rich, especially white European women, they tended to be isolated at home under the direct supervision of their parents, right, with little or no interaction with the outside world unless they were they were accompanied by a chaperone. Now, let's switch over to the North American colonies, where we see the French controlling places like Quebec, which will be up here in Canada, and all of this area known as Louisiana. On the Atlantic coast, we see the British or English colonies. And of course, these are the 13 original colonies that will develop into the United States. Now, the first kind of arrivals were the English, the Dutch, and the French. But even before then, the Spanish were already there. The Spanish were in Florida. The Spanish were in Mexico, in Texas, right, California, all these different places. The Spanish have been in North America longer than the English or the French were. Anyway, the English and the Dutch and the French, what they're going to be different is that they're going to be more self-governed. So what happens is that back home in Europe, colonists are going to want to leave Europe, right, for whatever different reasons, right, religious tolerance or economic opportunity, right? So they're going to leave their homeland back in Europe, and they're going to sail away to the Americas and set up colonies here, North America. And for the most part, unlike the Spanish, who had that kind of indirect control and government of the viceroys and stuff like that, the English and the French and the Dutch, they're going to be more self-governed, meaning that they're on their own, right? They've been granted permission. They have to get a charter or a permission slip from the monarch, right? Whether it's the French or the English or the Dutch ruler. And therefore, once they get to the Americas, once they get to North America, they're on their own. They got to figure out how to survive and how to govern and how to, keep their societies up and running. So they're going to have a longer tradition of self-government in North America, while in Latin America, there's not going to be self-government because, again, the monarchs are still kind of in charge, even though it's indirectly. Now, of course, the arrival of these Europeans is going to lead to tons and tons of conflicts with the Native Americans. And remember, most of the Native American population in North America are going to die from diseases, just like what happened in South America. The major difference is that the population of North America wasn't as concentrated, because remember, they didn't have large cities like Cusco and Tenochtitlan, right? But they had a whole bunch of small little towns all over North America. So even though the population died from disease, it wasn't as rapid or as dramatic as what we would have seen in Latin America. And it's all about territory, it's all about land. The Europeans want land to cultivate cash crops, and of course that's going to bring conflicts with the natives. Disease again kills a whole bunch of people. We know this already, smallpox being the main killer during this time. Now, one of the unique things about the relations between the Europeans and the French and the native populations, the Indians of North America, is that the French tended to be a little bit nicer than the English. And part of the reason is that the French were more interested in the fur trade, which was very lucrative, very profitable. And the French would be all over the North American wilderness making deals with Native Americans for fur, right? And they would exchange alcohol and gunpowder in exchange for fur. And then they would ship all that fur goods back to Europe, where they were made into fancy clothing, and the Europeans absolutely loved this fur. So because the French were more kind of like more interested in the fur trade and less interested in settling down and bringing over people and colonizing and creating towns and cities, they tended to have nicer relations. It doesn't mean that the French were nice, but they tended to be a little bit better than the English. Now, society in North America compared to Latin America is not going to be too multicultural. And part of the reason is, again, going back to migration. When the English came over, like the first ones being the Pilgrims and stuff, or the people in Virginia, right, in Jamestown, Virginia, when they came over as families, right? They didn't come over as conquistadors like the Spanish did. They came over as families. So the Europeans, the English, the French, right, they tended to marry them within their race, within their own population. So there wasn't a lot of intermixing of the races, and therefore there's not going to be mestizos and stuff like that not as much mestizos and mulattoes in North America as we would have seen in South or Latin America. That's another kind of like difference here. Now, Protestantism, of course, remember the English and the French and the Dutch, right? A lot of them are going to practice different types of Protestantism. Remember, Protestantism is a Christian religion, just like Catholicism is. But they are not going to be, the Protestantism is not going to be spread to the native population as successfully as Catholicism was spread to the native populations in Latin America. And remember, what's the reason why? Well, remember, the Protestants, they don't have monks, they don't have nuns, right? They don't have missionaries who are dedicated to the spreading of the faith. It doesn't mean that they didn't try to spread the faith, because they did, but it wasn't the number one goal. Remember, the Jesuits in Mexico and in Peru and in the Caribbean and Brazil, that's their number one priority, is to spread the faith. So the Catholics are going to be more successful at spreading the faith than the Protestants will. Now, of course, if we look at the modern day map of the United States, the vast majority, 51%, or slight majority, I guess, are going to be Protestants. And it's not because they converted the natives, it's because the European population of the United States, the European ancestry population of the United States, is mainly from England and Scotland and Germany, where a lot of Protestants originated from. All right, let's talk about the economy. So North America, just like South America, Latin America, they're going to be participating in the triangular trade in the Atlantic, right? And to recall, we know that manufactured goods like alcohol and gun and firearms are going to make their way to Africa, right? The Europeans are going to produce these goods, they're going to send it down to Africa in exchange for slaves, and they're going to purchase slaves from Africa, and they're going to send them to the Americas to work on cultivating of cash crops, mainly tobacco and sugar, but also cotton and coffee eventually. And then those plantations are going to produce raw materials or mineral resources, stuff like gold, silver, right? And all that stuff is going to be sent to Europe where it's either going to be consumed or used in manufacturing. So the Europeans, again, the French, they're going to dominate the fur trade, which is going to become popular in the old world of Europe. Now in North America, what would be the United States, we see a lot of cultivation of tobacco, and we see a lot of colonies that are going to use something called indentured servants. So let's talk about this new labor system that never really has existed before, indentured servitude. So what happens? You're a poor person living in England. You have nothing going for you. There's no opportunity for social mobility if you live in England. And then you hear about this brand new world of Massachusetts and Virginia and New York, right? And you're told that if you travel over there, right, you have an opportunity to improve your status, right? But you don't have any money because you're a poor English peasant. So there's a deal that you can take, a contract that you can sign, right? And you promise that if someone pays your trip, they grab you and your family and they send you to the Americas, they send you to the New World. You're gonna work for that person, kind of like your boss. Not your owner, because you're not a slave, but your boss, your contracted, boss. And you work for them for a number of years, 5, 7, maybe 10 years, and you're gonna be their servant. You're gonna do whatever they want. So you're gonna work out in the fields, you're gonna work in the home, you're gonna take care of their kids, whatever it is. But after that time period is up, you're gonna be free. And they're gonna give you land so you can start your own wealth or your own property. So that's indentured servitude. And a lot of the first people that came to North America, the first English people that came to North America, came here as indentured servants because they didn't have any other way to pay the super expensive trip to go across the Atlantic. So indentured servitude was a major labor force. But the problem was that it wasn't super effective because after 5, 7, 10 years, right, those landowners, those super rich landowners who want to make as much money as possible, they got to hire someone else and pay someone else to come over to the Americas and give them another part of their territory, part of their land, grant them, land. So instead of bringing in more servants, they said, you know what, why don't we just bring Africans? Why don't we just enslave Africans and bring them over? And that's exactly what we're seeing. So the decline of indentured servitude led to the increase of African slavery. Now, of course, slavery is going to be found mainly in the southern colonies, right? Virginia, the Carolinas, Georgia. But the fact is that slavery benefited all of the colonies, all of the economy of the colonies, because the slaves are going to be producing the cash crops and other goods that are going to be exported and sold, and therefore everyone benefits, of course, not the slaves. Now, other economic activities that were lucrative include fishing, right? People need to eat, and fish is a abundant supply of food, and forestry, cutting down trees to make ships and furniture and stuff like that. So these two, especially since North America had a lot of forests, these two were very lucrative, profitable industries. But there wasn't any gold mining. There definitely wasn't any silver mining, which is stuff that you would have seen in Latin America. All right, so that's it for part number 3, right? We're looking again, comparing the North American colonies and society and economies with that of the Latin American colonies. And I will see you next time in the 4th and final part of our video lecture. Thank you for watching.